well, what's God doing? And I do believe God is at work in the world. He's at work in people primarily. And when he's at work in people, people are awakening to something. Most of them don't know what they're awakening to. And those who have discernment need to look with discerning eyes to look at the world scenarios and then look at it from God's perspective. All right, well, let's throw it open for anything you want to talk about today.
Oh, I would like to repent. You've heard me complain about him always putting my feet on the ground. Well, I understand better the reason, because there are things that I have to do with my feet on the ground. And, taking classes, I've been taking some, getting an online license or something. And, they were teaching about agency and the laws of agency and the authority. And God, and in my ministry classes, it's about, that place in us where there's, we have where he dwells, where we're one with him, where we decree, and my decree are always signs and wonders, and on and on. We've been talking about the tree of life and, et cetera, et cetera. So on my birthday, I always get excited on my birthday because he does something special. On my birthday, I knew I had an assignment, but I'm in my meditation gathering, and and this is not political, you guys, okay? This is just me doing what God said. He showed me like a kid, large over the land here. I'm in a border area between two key border points. And he showed me like a kid sitting on the ground with Hot Wheels tracks. And I'm pushing trucks like Hot Wheels, just nice and gently down the track. And I'm like, huh? I mean, so I had to reach out, make sure I'm doing God's will. I don't want to do anything outside his perfect will, but let me show you what, let me tell you what he showed me. And the reason he had me do that was to timestamp, actually. Why he had me reach out was to timestamp for my own purpose. So then he said, I want you to deliver this to a friend I hadn't seen in years who had moved. He sends me down the freeway to my friend's address, who happened to be right at that point. And he said, I want your feet on this ground for your authority. And I'm like, whoa, okay. So I'm freaking out because I know where he's sending me. All of a sudden, Google says, take exit 222B. And God says, 222B. Now, I'm into, he always talks to me through those numbers. He starts talking about Revelation 22:2 and the trees of life on both sides of the river. The Detroit River. I'm like, okay. Then he starts talking to me about Ephesians 2:2b, that place where he's in me. And, and as his agent. And I'm like, okay. Then he starts talking about Acts 2:22 about signs and wonders. Oh my gosh, I'm freaking out, but I'm excited. I tell you, I never tell my husband these things because, I just don't tell him. I couldn't help it. I had to tell him. And I said, I know this sounds crazy. He said, wait a minute. You forget, I was with you when you walked the beach in Fort Lauderdale and what happened. I'm like, oh, okay. Next thing I know, everything changed. Everything changed in that situation. So I'm excited. Lord, I don't mind you putting my feet on the ground. I will 222B. I'm still excited. It's days later, but I'm just excited. I'm so excited.
Well, I mean, to be honest, if it isn't on earth as it is in heaven, then, what is it? And I think, yes, there's a lot of heavenly stuff you do and a lot of preparation, but ultimately it's got to transform, change the earth. And that means changing situations in our personal lives and around our personal lives and in the spheres that God gives us measures of authority to actually outwork. And it is great when you see something, change radically when you do something yourself. And I think that's always good. And because sometimes there's a lot of things we do that you don't necessarily always immediately see the result of. So it's perfectly understandable to be excited when you do something that does have an immediate effect and you see, wow, something's changed here. Now, there'll be obviously a whole load of other people who will be saying, you shouldn't have done that because they have a totally different view. And I know this is not political because that's not the point. You're just saying you did what you did and something changed. And I think part of the problem with a lot of people who do look at the political things around this, because obviously I've had lots of conversations with people in Canada and people on the borders about what's going on in Canada and all the things. And they're like, some people are sympathetic one way and some people are looking at it, well, they're affecting me negatively on another way. So what do you do when you look at situations like that? It's such a mess. And there's such a mixture of emotions and thoughts and ideas about it all. What's God's view? And I tend to look at the bigger picture from God's perspective on when we look at all these things. And, from an eternal perspective, none of this has any real value whatsoever. But there are signs that you can see in things that then I think you can then get behind and say, okay, Father, what are you doing here? What do you want me to do here? How can I help, partner with you in what you're doing? And I do think the sign that people are challenging their, where they are with the governments that they're in is a sign that they are coming to an awareness that government isn't the answer. What they're doing is not the issue, and God is not supporting them or not supporting them in what they're actually protesting about, because I don't necessarily personally agree with their protest. But in reality, that's not the issue. It's what am I seeing in a spiritual dynamic that's going on in these things around the world that is an indication that God's moving in people. And what can I do to protect that? Because that's what the Earth Shield is there to do, is to protect what God is doing in the earth from external influence and to shield people from where something may be a sign that people are beginning to awaken, so that won't get hijacked in that it purely becomes a political issue, because then you're back to where you started. We were looking for a political solution here. Well, we need another government. Well, another government isn't going to be any better than the last government in one sense, no matter who you support. Everyone complains, so and you got to look at it, well, what's God doing? And I do believe God is at work in the world. He's at work in people primarily. And when he's at work in people, people are awakening to something. Most of them don't know what they're awakening to. And those who have discernment need to look with discerning eyes to look at the world scenarios and then look at it from God's perspective. Because when I've talked to people, most of them are looking at it from their own perspective alone. And it's very clear to me that that's what's going on, because they're coming out of very, very soulish attitudes, and it's like, well, these are our rights. It's like as if God gave you them. God didn't give you political rights. Sorry, and, when you talk to US people, we're very different in the UK because we've never had those systems in place. So we have a very different cultural, societal sort of way of looking at things, which means we don't get so upset or stirred when someone appears to be removing our freedoms, eroding our freedoms, as they say. Because I was talking to someone yesterday, in a governmental group, and they were like, "No, the freedoms are being." I said, "Look, we're not here to deal with that. That you might be concerned about that. Fine. Well, do what you need to do in your own life. But this is not an area that God is going to legislate in the way you think he will to support your political view, because he's not." And if you try and make him do that, it will be you who's driving the agenda and trying to do that yourself in your own strength. It won't be God, and you'll get very worn out trying to do it, because that's not how God views it. And it is interesting. I like looking at different cultures and looking at, well, what makes them, tick, and why are they upset over this issue? And I look at it and think, why are they upset over that? Because I'm not in that culture, and therefore it doesn't affect me in the same way. But I like looking at why, and I think I would ask everybody to ask themselves the question, why does that make me angry? Why does that upset me? Why does that stir me? What stirs my emotions when I see this or this or this going on? And actually, is that a reflection of the heart of God, or is that just my soul's programming? Because I think we've got to be very careful we don't mix the two, because then we will operate in a political spirit and we'll mix the religious spirit in there with it, saying it's God, you know. Just like, you know, I was talking to somebody and they were like, well, the Second Amendment is our God-given right. And I just laughed, really, because you seriously think God gave you the right to kill people or bear arms against other people? Is it got a peace? So I'm not saying you shouldn't have it or not have it, but don't put it to God who gave it you and then defend it as if this is your Christian right, which is why the whole prophetic movement has become politicized. You know, there is no Christian right to this. You know, it's a political thing. Actually, when you look back in history, it was given to you by Freemasons. So do you really want to defend it? A lot of people obviously do. Why? Well, because it's programmed. You know, it's not programmed in the UK. So no one would have an issue. No one wants to carry a gun. Nobody, other than a criminal.
Yeah.
You know, even our police aren't actually armed, because it's not a societal thing. Now, you could look at that and think, well, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Well, look at our murder rates. Look at your murder rates.
That's
you know?
so true.
I wouldn't want what you've got in terms of crime and how it works. You know, and I think some of that is because of some of the way things are viewed from a soulish perspective. But I'm just saying to people, if something stirs you, find out from God what it is and make sure it's a godly stirring and emotion and not an ungodly one.
Yeah, you know, sometimes I think I'm slow to act because I'm like, Lord, you cannot usurp my free will. I freely give you my will. I only want to do your will. I want to do what you say, what I see you doing. And I'm slow and careful in that. And then, like I said, I reached out, please agree with me that I'm not, that I'm only doing his will. And the thing that really got me about that action was like, I was a kid and I was just gently playing with, and moving them in a joy. I was like, oh my gosh, and I mean, and that, that I knew then. It's like just my heart of it, like, okay, it was amazing.
It is very interesting when you just look at people's responses and reactions to things and just ask the question of, well, why is that so important to you? Yeah, and it's interesting then to see people's reactions, because some people don't know really. When you really ask them, they don't really know. They're just angry about something. And others, they do know, and they think what they know is right because that's the way they've been programmed to think. And it often isn't the case. Just like all the deconstruction I've gone through, I would have been absolutely convinced I was right over things I believed in the past, which I'm horrified that I could ever even believe them. Yeah. But in the past, I was totally convinced that my thinking was okay, and I would have attributed it to God, because I would have used my understanding of God to validate what I believe. And now I really know God. Obviously, I can't use that because he's not the person or who I actually thought he was. Therefore, none of those things that I used his nature to validate, now I can, because he's not like that. And therefore, those things aren't like that anymore. But once I would have argued that they were, because that was where I was. And I think we're all on a journey of deconstruction if we're willing. And I think, I for years, I would say every day, I don't want free will today. Yeah. I don't want to make decisions based on my own understanding, because I know where it'll get me, not in a good place. So I just want to do your will. I only want to outwork your heart and purpose. And I said it over and over and over and over and over. I don't say it now because I think he knows. But it's totally in my heart. I think in the end, he says, I don't think you need to tell me anymore. I get it, but I carry that. I carry that whole attitude. It's like, I know when I'm operating independently, it is not going to produce any real good fruit. So I'd rather,
And my call is mercy. That's one of my calls, mercy. Yeah. And you introduced me to triumphant mercy. Thank you for that. And you know, a teacher close to me or that I value said, you can be so merciful that it's sin. And I'm like, except when you're using his mercy and not your own.
Yeah. I mean, if you think of wrong, you know, and a lack of identity for the word sin, then too much mercy is totally illogical. And it's an oxymoron, because your identity is in the image of God, and God is mercy. He is loving kindness, never ends. You know, it's like, it's who he is, and you can't exhibit too much mercy. You know, how can you? Oh, well, the only reason people would say that you could is they're looking at some people don't deserve mercy because what they've done. They reserve punishment. So if you're giving too much mercy, well, those person don't deserve it. You shouldn't let them off. And, you know, mercy is not letting anybody off. And I think this is what people need to have a whole change of thinking around. Mercy is not letting someone off from what they've done. Mercy is overcoming everything they've done, which stops them encountering God in relationship and becoming who they are. Because there are always consequences of what we do. Now, God's mercy will bring good out of those consequences, but there's still consequences. And some things, you know, I can have mercy on someone, let's say I know, who killed someone I know. And I could have mercy, I could forgive them, but my mercy would not keep them out of jail if they were found guilty of murder. There's a consequence humanly from what they've done. Now, eternally, there is no consequence because Jesus already dealt with what they've done, but there's human consequence. And of course, we don't want people to suffer the consequences, but that's not in our hands most of the time. It could be in my own thing, because I am not going to exact any form of vengeance or retribution on that person, you know, myself, you know, but I know God doesn't either. But man's way of dealing with crime is not really that restorative. It is punitive and it is retributive, and therefore if someone commits a crime, they're going to pay the penalty for it from a human perspective. But that doesn't mean that God is going to cause them, because I've engaged people in the fire who are the worst people you could ever imagine, have done the worst things that you could ever imagine, and they're in the consuming fire of God's love because they're still children of God and he loves them. Irrespective of what they've done, they face what they've done, and it's torment, actually. When I've seen people facing what they've actually done, they are in anguish because they have a realization now in a different way of a different form of light, you know. But God doesn't. God's not there. His fire is not burning people and hurting people. His fire is refining people and purifying people, so they can get to receive the mercy which is free and the grace that's free and the unconditional love. Because love is unconditional and God is love. And you always get but from the religious. But he's holy. But he's righteous. But he's just. But he's the judge. Yeah, he's all those things. But they're descriptions of what he does. Love is who he is. And even in what he does, love determines how he judges, how his justice is outworked, how his righteousness is outworked, and how all of these things work. And his holiness doesn't mean that we're unapproachable. We can't come to him because he's too holy. The very reality is Jesus has opened the door that we can come to him. And you can read in Colossians that he's made us holy as he's holy. So whatever you think of holiness in the religious sense, God is just too pure for all of these terrible people to be able to come near him. That whole mindset goes out of the window when you think of God as love, and love is unconditional. So at the end of the day, there is no but. There can be no but in unconditional love. As soon as you put a but in it, it becomes conditional. Now, I know people say, well, unconditional love isn't in the Bible. You know, and they're right. It probably never says unconditional love anywhere. But from the truth of what God is, and if you look at what love is kind, love keeps no record of wrongs. You know, the things that 1 Corinthians 13 says about love, you know, that love is not earned. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Why? Well, because we've said 3 Hail Marys and a few penances or something. Oh, well, God won't keep a record of it. But if we don't, he will. No, he won't. It's gone. You know, it's all forgotten, completely removed from the east, as far as the east is from the west, which is perpetual far, isn't it? You can never get west from east or east from west. You just keep going in the same direction, and you'll never actually find the things where God has placed all those things that we've done, because they're no longer in existence in his understanding or thinking. So it is a challenge, and I think the religious spirit will always get us to try and focus on what we do or need to do to earn something or deserve something that's already ours. No wonder people are weary and heavy laden, carrying that religious burden of being good enough for God. You know, I'm just so grateful that Jesus has made me good enough for God, because I'm the righteousness of God in Christ. You know, I never had to make myself worthy or righteous. He made me so. You know, and I didn't even have to ask him. He did it because he loves me. And that's how much unconditional love is. He did it when I didn't even ask. You know? Anyway, Mary, you got your hand up there.
I just want to jump onto something that Pam talked about. And when she talked about how, you know, God is not in a hurry, so neither do we have to be. However, we usually feel that, like, boy, you know, I got to jump on this right now, and we got to deal with this right now. And then I guess we look back and we realize that when we jumped on it right now, we messed it up. And the willingness to take your hands off of things, and especially when you don't understand, and you see something that you know, or that you believe really is something that needs to be dealt with, but you don't have an answer, and God doesn't appear to be either giving you one or in much of a hurry to see that the situation changes. And the willingness to be able to just step back and just say, okay, keep my hands off of it. And if your will is stay out of it, even though I don't like that and it's going against my will, I'll take your will, because you know something that I don't know. You're seeing this from a perspective that I don't understand. You have a plan that has not been dropped down into my level of understanding. And so I've got to trust that just standing back and not doing anything which may appear counterintuitive to solving a problem is the best solution. But yet how difficult that can be to just do nothing.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head there with the word trust. Do we trust that God is good? Do we trust that God is looking out for our best and wants to bless us? Do we really trust him, or actually do we think we need to make sure by doing it ourselves? Because we don't.
He needs some help. He needs our help.
Yeah. And
don't bother with this, Lord. I'll deal with this. I can take care of this. And we mess it up.
You know, when you look at it and you look at we don't see the bigger picture, the whole picture. We see our bit, and it's very blinkered generally, because we're fixed on the problem. And just because there is a problem doesn't mean that we are called to fix that problem. Whether that problem be in our lives, or whether that problem be in the world, or wherever, or in our family, or whatever else. And usually something stirs us, whether it's compassion or anything else, well, I've got to fix it. You know, and I learned a long time ago that when people came to me and asked for help, I needed to check with the Father what he permitted me to do in that, because most of the time, actually what people were going through, God was using. You know, and if I'd helped them out of what he was going through, they would have never actually been transformed by it. Now, that doesn't mean that God brought that bad thing, or actually that it was a bad thing. You know, sometimes we can look at things and think, this is really bad, but actually, from someone else's perspective, it might not be bad at all, because they see what it's doing and the good it's doing. And I think that's really why, as you say, we've got to trust that he does know everything, and he knows how everything works together for good. where we don't, and we look at it and think, well, that can't be any good. And he looks at it and think, well, that's wonderful, because look at how this is happening, that'll do that, and this will happen. And 10 steps down the line, he sees the end result, whereas we're looking only at the first step and looking at it at a superficial level of usually how it makes me feel.
Yeah.
And if it's hurting me or not in some way, therefore remove it. You know, and it's okay. Well, you know, there are a few things in there where trust then is evidenced, not in the good times, but when things are not so good.
Yeah.
You know, what did the disciples do when the storm was raging and Jesus was asleep? Accused him of not caring about them. No trust there whatsoever. It was like, you don't care about us, we're all going to perish. And he's like, you don't get it, do you, really? It's like, I'm here.
You just interrupted my nap.
Yeah, so just let me show you something. Bang, we're at the other side of the lake and the storm's gone.
Yeah.
You know, in an instant. And it was, the implication was, well, if you just listened to what I said, that we were going to the other side, this wouldn't be an issue right now. But you didn't believe me, did you? Really, that's what he was saying. You looked at the storm and that had more power than what I said. And that is where the trust comes in. Do we believe in the circumstances to have more power and the problems to have more power than the solution? And that's where people then jump in. I've got to fix this, I've got to change this, you know. And in the long run, you look back and think, oh, I wish I'd stayed out of it, you know, quite a lot. You know, I just wish I'd stayed out of it. And sometimes it's like, it is compassion. Sometimes it's not, you know, you're not doing it, you know, because you don't care. You're probably doing things sometimes because you do care, but you don't see the real picture. Therefore, you're doing more harm than good in a lot of situations, unless you're very clear of what God says to do. You know, I've looked at world situations and things that are going on, and I sometimes ask, do I have any mandate here to do anything about this? I don't want those people to suffer this or that or the other. But I'm then looking at it, and am I then questioning whether God wants them to suffer? Am I trusting? I'm probably not even trusting by asking the question in the way I ask it. You know, so in a sense, it's like, no, I think probably need to sort of say, look, I know you want to get good in this situation. Is there anything you want me to do?
Yeah.
And I've asked the question, or should I deal with this hurricane or deal with this whatever storm or whatever? Oh, we've got a big storm coming in tomorrow, you know, which is, we just had a storm which has hit Scotland and the north of England, which is away from us. So we just had a little bit of wind. Tomorrow it's hitting us direct, head on. Well, what am I going to do? Well, am I going to change it? Well, I don't feel anything to change it. You know, I don't feel God wants me to change it. Am I going to protect my property? Yep. I'm going to make sure there's no damage done in that sense, because, hey, don't want things to be damaged, whatever else. And of course, I wouldn't want anyone else's property to be damaged. But maybe I don't have authority over their property in the way they do. Now, you know, if God said, yeah, push this storm away somewhere where it isn't going to hurt anybody, then I would do it. You know, I would engage with the storm. I would engage with the elementals. I would be interacting to see, why is this happening? What's going on? Is this purely, well, it's a storm. These storms happen. We live in a world with, you know, climatic conditions that produce, you know, anti cyclones and things that spin around one way or another. That's the world as it is in the minute. But actually, is there something behind that? So it's not wrong to ask the question, because if there is a spiritual dynamic that is looking to cause harm and havoc for some reason, then you need to find the reason and deal with the reason if you've got permission to do so. But someone will. You know, God is not just going to let something happen, you know, in some way. And I know people pray, you know, they pray for help. And I think God does listen to prayers. And I think God obviously is merciful and, you know, doesn't want people to suffer. So, and then you look at that and think, okay, but I have to trust God in it. Why doesn't God just stop all storms? Well, why didn't God stop everything? Because actually he's teaching us to administrate and govern in this, and to trust him, and I don't have the answer. Some people ask me questions. I'm like, look, all I can say is God's good. I don't have an answer to your specific because I'm not God. So go and ask him yourself if you really, but don't do it in that accusatory way. Don't go and accuse him of not caring about you because something happened, like a storm.
Yeah, I mean, well, actually parts of our East Coast, I think as of tomorrow morning, may be in for some really unusual hurricane force winds, which for this time of year is unusual. And if you're on the coastline, yeah, I haven't looked at the weather yet this morning, but as of last night, they felt that there was a real possibility. Now, this is way north of us, but and you mentioned the point, yeah, you don't want things to go wrong, and so you do take provision. However, if you have a house that is right on the beach that is prone, that when a storm comes in that's high tide, you sort of have to sit back and say, is this the wisest place to live?
Yeah.
Knowing what you're potentially facing. Yes, it's absolutely beautiful. And when the weather's nice, it's wonderful. However, there is a downside. And when the downside hits, it's devastating. Is this a smart move? So, I mean, there's also some common sense that you have to factor into.
Oh, there is, yeah. I mean, foolish man built his house on the sand.
Literally on the beach.
Even a person here who's on our front desk, she said this morning, and she's like, I'm moving my car from its usual parking space and it's going further up the hill. Because she usually parks it in a car park or place right next to the beach.
Yeah.
It will have a lot of sea splashing all over that, or any other debris that might be blown up or thrown up by the storms. So we've actually missed all the storms this year in our region, but this one is actually coming right into the southwest first, so we get it first before anyone else.
So just as last point, it's interesting listening to a lot of different newscasts and people talking, and it's amazing that there seems to be this under thread that I hear from people who I really don't expect would say something, is to say, I think there's more to what is going on in the world in general than just natural things, hinting there's a spiritual element at work here. I don't know what it is. I don't even know how to put it. And some people actually put it into words to say, there's something spiritual going on here. Now, they don't know how to explain it, but they recognize something has transcended just human stupidity. There's something else behind it that is driving just the normal humanity.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the awakening. I think people are beginning to awaken spiritually. They don't have the answers. They don't know really where to look, but they know something
is wrong.
Knows something isn't right. And therefore they know that where they would normally look for the answers to those things, there are no real answers in those things. And I do think that is part of the shaking that is coming for people to their trust in other things will be shaken, so that they then put their trust into the solid rock that won't be shaken and won't move, and I think that's part of what God is doing, in the midst of all the things that are happening, and all in the midst of all the things where there is an agenda on the other side to rob, kill, and destroy, of course. But God wants to bring abundant life. But if people look for another source for abundance, like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the fruit of that tree, rather than the fruit of the tree of life, then they're not going to have the abundance that God intends or desires for them. So I think, this awakening is taking place, and it's good. You just sort of, you pick up that, you're discerning from just someone's questions, someone's comments, even comments in the news or other things, when you think people are beginning to be aware, and they're awakening. And I think that's a great, thing, because God is awakening people, and hopefully eventually they've awakened to love, fully embracing what love really is and that nature. And then, things will begin the balance will shift.
And so hence the importance of take your hands off of it and let let things work out in God's timing. Unless he directs you to do something specific, you
Absolutely.
don't need to run in and fix the problem, because there's probably a lot more that he needs to bring to the surface that will really help people to understand there is not a natural solution to any of this. There is a solution, but you're not going to find it in government. You're not going to find it in any natural scenario. And this probably is what it's going to take when everything that we have all depended on just falls by the wayside, and you realize, well, that doesn't work. Well, that doesn't work. Well, but there is something that does.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, awesome. Okay, who's got their hand up next? I think Robin, I think you had your hand up. It's gone to come down, or?
Well, this is a super simple question, but I was thinking maybe there is a lot more to this than what might be the simple answer. But just a passing comment, as you were making earlier about engaging elementals. Can you paint a picture of what that looks like? Are you binding and loosing? I mean, what exactly, and kind of give us like a little bit of a picture, if you would, as to how you feel God leads you to do that and the manner in which you engage the elementals.
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing to do with binding, loosing, or any of that. I think, that whole understanding from a association with spiritual warfare, I think was
exactly
understood. But it is connecting with creation through the conduit that God has created for that. So I believe everything is sentient. The more I've engaged, the more I've experienced that there are angelic beings representing everything, that actually when I've engaged the earth, I'm talking to somebody. We had a group that engaged, and we encountering the core of the earth, and the core of the earth started to speak to us, and tell us how upset it was that, it was associated with, hell and bad things. It's been painted a bad picture, because in the Bible it says under the earth, doesn't it? Right. So the core of the earth was saying, hey, we got a bad deal here. When we're not bad, Yeah. So, and I think, the elementals, and, I've encountered, I think, 7 different groups of elementals. It's not just earth, wind, fire, water. There's plants, and there's nature, animal. There's all sorts of different, and I've seen 7 myself, and I've seen 7 thrones in the realms of heaven that are connected to the elementals, and the elementals need to be guided. They were not created with independent abilities to do something without guidance. And of course, Adam was designed to guide them, because he was the son of God, and he had responsibility for having dominion over creation and bringing blessing and subduing and other things. And so then that system gets messed up when Adam then chooses to forgo his sonship by choosing independence from God, and then operating as an independent person to try and be like God. Elementals are disconnected, and they don't listen to Adam in the same way. But Adam did give authority to someone else. So the elementals began to listen to that source of authority. Therefore, that source of authority began to influence the actual elements that make up and establish the universe, creation, whatever you want to say, and then they were looking to cause harm. So the elementals themselves they're neutral. They're created as a neutral things, but they were created for us to engage with them, for man to engage with them, not anyone else. Just like sowing and reaping was essentially created for good, not bad, but it now works that way, because of the choice Adam made. And therefore, now when I engage with something that I see is connected to what I would normally call nature or creational things, whether that be the earth or the wind or storms or weather or anything like that, the planet itself, earthquakes, eruptions, things going on in the core of the earth, in the crust of the earth, whole remit and gamut of stuff. I I'm not assuming that I'm going to tackle this on my own against something. Usually it's like, well, the binding loosely, well, we're coming against this, or we're going to come against that spirit. We're going to come against that. It's all confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
I believe when we know our authority as sons, then the elementals respond to us when we engage them. So you can engage with the elementals that could be behind some of the winds. I'm not saying all of that is true. It's just all when you see wind. Wind is a thing because of the atmospheric conditions and how pressure moves and how air. It's all part of the ecosystem we live in. But sometimes that ecosystem can be used deliberately. And I remember a friend who did a court case to try and deal with a hurricane that was coming through the southeast somewhere. And they went to court, looked if there were any accusations that they needed to deal with in the heavens. And they addressed this being that appeared as a fallen angel or whatever. And this being said, I'm an elemental. And they were like, well, what's that? Sort of had no clue at that moment. But they questioned, well, why are you doing what you're doing? Because we have been directed to. Now, if we as sons of God don't take responsibility for creation and for the planet and for everything to bring good and to steward it correctly, then others will. And there, of course, are people that, probably feel they're more connected to those things than Christians have, because Christians have almost pushed that aside, because that's really not something we get involved with. So that will be Wiccans or witches or, other occulty people or new agey people who, well, they're more into that stuff. And that's not, we don't have anything to do with that. Well, in reality, not all those people are bad. Always the heart motives are not all bad. Some of them are trying to do something good, but they're using the wrong way of doing it. But some of them are, and some of them may have an agenda. And there are beings that are deliberately controlled, actually, what I've found, into what we call natural disasters. And not all of those things are actually natural at all. They're orchestrated. And they're orchestrated generally because there's an agenda behind the orchestration, usually financial, to control world economic situations. And therefore, these beings that we engage with were called disaster, devastation, and destruction. And they were, when we quizzed them, and I saw an area of darkness in the earth, or several areas of darkness, where things negative were happening. So you could say climatically or societally on the earth. And so I went and looked into that void and found these beings operating in these areas. So I'm like, okay, but I didn't come to fight them. I came to restore them because I want to stop them doing what they're doing. So I use the authority I have to challenge what they're doing. But my heart is that they would be restored to their original purpose and condition. But when quizzing them, they were almost like strings attached to them being pulled by those controlling the economics of the planet, who actually benefit from devastation. They benefit from natural disasters, so-called. They benefit from earthquakes because they go in and they do all the repairing and they do this. And they like destabilization of economies and areas of the world because they benefit from it. They benefit from the usury that they get from the loans they give. I mean, it's a system that works on all of this conflict that goes on. So having challenged those three groups or three beings that I met, which were representative of groups of beings functioning all over the earth, after sort of a process, we saw them restored, and they were restored to their original condition, which is what we look to refer them to. This is who you are. This is who you were created to be. This is what your purpose is. And they were actually restored to preservation, conservation, and construction. And then they joined us in the Earth Shield to help us look at those things that are going on the earth and ensure that where the elementals had been influenced by these things, that we dealt with that and we freed the elementals from their influence, negative influence, and we also then look to restore those who were behind it, because there's always something behind that. And that's what we're, that's what you do. Now, sometimes, obviously, you have to make sure again that this is the Father's giving you his intention, permission in these areas. I wouldn't just that I could just go and interact with an elemental and change something just because I wanted to. I will always want to do what I see the Father doing. So I'm always going to make sure I'm checking the Father's heart to make sure that he is inspiring me in this area or that area. But there is a big interaction, and the elementals that are connected to this earth, there are also elementals connected to the solar system. There are elementals connected to other dimensions as well.
I was just going to ask you that. I was wondering if there were some in alternate dimensions and how you would kind of engage that.
Yeah.
And let me ask, because I was thinking another question too, just listening to the talk that your last, Justin's last podcast.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just wondering, like, when you go into alternate dimensions and you meet entities, I was just wondering, maybe you can't completely answer this, but how much of it for you is visual? How much of it is I'm sensing? And maybe you're even picking things up in the energetic realm. I was just wondering kind of, how it is for you in a kind of general way.
I'm there. So yeah. You don't need to put a description on something when you're there. So I am there doing something and I'm describing what I'm doing if I'm writing it down or talking to people about it while I'm doing it, if there's an engagement or an activation I'm involved in. So I'm there, and therefore I don't have to define, is it visual? Well, I'm not seeing it like I'm seeing you right now on the screen, because it's operating in a different way, but it's the same. I can describe the same things that I would be seeing in a dimensional. If I went through a portal in the constellations to see the collection of portals that are on the other side connected to other dimensions, I can describe them to you just like I could describe the roses that are on Michelle's picture or the painting that Pamela's got on her picture. I can describe that, to you in the same way as if it's a very visual thing, but information is information, whichever way you perceive it. So my spirit is communicating the reality of what I'm doing. It's not that I'm seeing a third person picture of something and I'm observing it. I'm there. So if I'm there, I'm there. I'm not looking really down at myself. I'm there and I'm just outworking whatever it is that the Father is directing me into. And I wouldn't, the dimensional reality, I have a mandate to be multidimensionally there, and I'm engaged there all the time. Aspects of me or part of me, or whichever you want to look at a multidimensional reality of living, I am functioning in those dimensional places now. As I'm functioning in the solar system right now, I'm functioning in many other areas right now, because I've learned how to do that. Now, I only have to shift my consciousness here to engage with where I am there to then describe to you what I'm doing. And I'm also vaguely aware through the connection within me, within the Merkaba within me, of the portals that are within me that are quantumly entangled to all of the places I am. So there's a constant stream of information coming to me that I'm sort of receiving that informs me what I need to know when I need to know it in a cognitive sense. And sometimes I receive the information and it isn't cognitive at that moment, but it will become cognitive at some point when I need it to be. So it's a way of living which is entangled with so many different things that you have permission to be involved in, and it's who you are. So it becomes a state of being rather than a state of doing. It's not like I'm doing all these things. I am So it's my state of being. It's who I am. It's a fulfillment of who I was made to be, of how God sees me, which is not linked to the performance of what I'm doing, but that's an expression of my being. And that's a totally different way of looking at all this that I now sort of am more aware of. And therefore being rather than doing is a key for me in everything. And I'm aware because God showed me. I mean, you know, I was aware that I'd been to all these places and that I regularly engaged these places. But then over a period, I became aware that I was in a lot of places, seemingly, doing a lot of things in each of those places, like a simultaneously functioning in groups. And the Father said one day, I'm going to take the blinkers off your eyes so that you can see what you're doing multidimensionally. Says you wouldn't have been able to handle it before now, but now I'm going to let you see. You've only seen glimpses of it. Now you're going to show you. So he did. And then he took me to all these places that I am multiply functioning in. And some of them I'm doing multiple things at the same time in those places. And I've described them in some of them, I think Vision Destiny series and things like that, and other places that I became aware of. Now, you know, what I found is I can enjoy being here on earth and actually more in tune to what's going on here on earth, because I don't have to be consciously always focused on doing something in heaven. I am in heaven. I am in multiple places in the realms of heaven and elsewhere, and I am functioning out of my identity as being multidimensional. So I enjoy actually having more time to do things in a sense of joy here, and also then looking at the world here and beginning to interact with creation here in that way as well. So it's difficult to describe, you know, in a way. Well, am I seeing it? Am I here? Well, I'm just there, you know. That's the reality, you know. So I don't really need to define it other than I'm there and I can tell you what I'm doing there at any time I need to, you know. And sometimes when you have encounters that open up something new or a new place to engaging that you've not been before, then those things can be very vivid experiences, that because they're designed to be vivid, to trigger you to interact with it and to store it as something which is key. So there's an importance to things that I find that happens, and I get triggered on the inside to take note of this. This is not something you should just let go by without really taking on as something that God is showing you, because he has a reason for doing that. And usually then I will go back to the Father and say, what was all that about? You know, what were you trying to show me? You know, what was it? Why did I have that encounter in that way? Because there was something significant that actually triggered my reaction, and then I would always engage the Father around it. Generally when there's something new or something he wants to unveil or reveal, you know. And recently, as you know, some of us have been engaging in governmental groups. I've loved the interaction with groups of people in which I'm learning things all the time, because each time I engage with another group, we find a little bit of another piece of the jigsaw puzzle that seems to add to the things that I experienced the last time, which is, you know, great. You know, I love that. So, okay. Yeah, Daniel, you've patiently had your hand up there. So
yeah, good morning, everybody. I have some things. I'll be brief though. One, you might remember a few months ago, Mike, I mentioned about fellowship where I live here with others that are open to the kinds of things that we participate in. So thankfully things have moved forward. You, I think, know Michelle Hart, and you might know Nina also that participates. Yeah. Right. So I'm with a group now in Ocala that they meet on Tuesdays, a beautiful, open-hearted group of people and kind of different levels in their journey. And you may remember Christy, who was with us at your conference a few years ago in the Orlando and Kissimmee area.
Yeah.
And so it's been a blessing to me, and I trust I've been a blessing to them. Also, I want to ask you, Francois Dutoit put out just kind of an open question if anyone knew of any good churches in the London area. So I don't know if you might want to recommend anything. I can communicate with him directly there. That was one. And then lastly, Mike is familiar, but I just will throw it out to you. I've been working with a dimensional area called Translania. And one of the things that the Lord has showed me is that it would take other sons to participate. And so I have moved in that direction and sharing with various people. So I'm just throwing it out to you. They are a group that, or the civilization, Translania, their civilization is filled with hatred. And they once were very much involved in the love of God. And so I met some beings from there, and I've continued to participate in various things that the Lord has had me do. It's been very interesting. I think the last time I had a focus engagement, fallen angels were restored there. But if you feel led, whether it just might mean to send angels, there's an actual order of angels called Philia that particularly I had been directed to work with in ministry there with Translania. But anyway, you feel led, sending angels, sending love bombs, however you may feel led to seek to move that civilization to restoration. I just would encourage you and be glad for your support therein. And trying to think lastly, it's not coming to me at the moment, but those three things. Anything, Mike, in terms of the church in the London area?
I'm not really connected particularly. I would say there's a Glory Company that meets up in the southeast area. That's probably the ones I know the most, but don't have any really particularly connections to things. There are people I know, but not necessarily churches. But the Glory Company are sort of a company of people who meet and gather and do things together. So, but I'm not sure that's in central London or that close, but it's in the M25 area of London. So Glory Company, you can find them by searching for them. But Matt and Pearl are the two guys who sort of head that up. But they're a great couple. They're connected with Justin Abraham. Justin probably might know more than I do. But no, so that way. But yeah, I essentially, there are lots of dimensional realities that God's opening up, and it's great that you're engaging. And if anyone feels led to connect with you, great. We're certainly looking that way when we do governmental things, and we look at the governmental groups and how they relate and engage. And yeah, it's exciting what's happening. Where a few years ago we wouldn't have never been talking about anything like this. It's just things are opening up, and the reality of these things are being awakened, and we're beginning as sons because we're maturing. God's entrusting us with engaging dimensions and activating and working with angels. I mean, the sort of the angelic order that's working with you. I mean, I'm so connected to the angelic orders in a way that I've not been before, because we need them. We really need their help and cooperation, and we want to work together in this sort of union of outworking the Father's heart. And I think, encourage everybody to become as aware as you can of the angelic, both the angelic around your own life here in this dimension, but also how the angelic works within the earth shield, how the angelic works within the solar system, within the gates and the gateway systems and all of that. And definitely out into the dimensions and the cosmos, because there is just so much activity going on that most people are not aware of. And if you set your heart towards being available for God in those areas, who knows where he might send you or what you might be doing. you know, one day you might be sharing some dimension that you are also engaged with, that God's given you the heart for, or, you know, mandate for. And, you know, therefore, because we need more and more people to be fulfilling that sonship mandate towards creation, not just the earth. The earth is, I guess you would say, our priority, but actually we don't have to do everything here and then start doing things elsewhere. You know, it's all an ongoing journey in which we do multiple things and have multiple levels of engagement. So yeah, awesome that you can you're certainly doing that. Excellent. Okay, all right, well, I'm going to leave it there. So nice seeing you all again today. Good, thank you for the questions and the comments and the interaction. It's been great, and I'll see you all next time.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.